Welcome to Season 7 of the Art of Teaching podcast. I'm Matthew Green, and I'm so grateful that you've joined me today. It's wonderful to know that there are teachers across the globe that are finding our episodes useful, so please take the time to subscribe, share the episodes, and leave some feedback. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the Dharawal-speaking people who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm recording. I pay respects to the elders past and present of the Dharawal Nation and extend that respect to other Aboriginal people that are listening to this. I hope that you get as much out of our discussion as I did. Please enjoy. Today I'm delighted to share with you a recent discussion that I had with Chad Ferris. He is an education consultant who focuses on learning design and organisational culture by developing and sustaining effective and innovative approaches for students, staff and teachers. He also explores, evaluates and designs learning spaces that enhance future-focused thinking and learning. Leadership development is a passion and key focus of his, mainly through coaching, mentoring and professional learning. Chad believes building individual and collective capacity through effective innovative practices is where we can see real change as we prepare our students for the world of tomorrow. Chad, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for chatting with me today. How's it going your end?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me, Matthew. I love the work that you're doing and, capturing everybody's perspective on education and allowing us to sort of share our perspective and a bit about our story, which I think is really important, that whole essence of storytelling.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much. Where are you phoning in from?
I'm phoning in currently from Orange, New South Wales in Australia. I relocated here in December last year. Like many people during COVID lockdowns, we sort of learned that we could sort of work in many different places. So I took that opportunity and relocated up here, and currently also renovating a house. So that's keeping me very busy on top of work as well.
Gosh, quite possibly the most important question for our discussion. What's your coffee order or drink of choice?
Drink of choice, and my coffee order is cappuccino, plain and simple, but it needs to be a good one at that.
And how's the coffee culture out in Orange? I know you're originally from Sydney. A lot of hipsters down in Sydney. What about Orange?
Yeah, I was based in the inner west, so big coffee culture in Sydney. But I can safely say the coffee in Orange is very much up there, and yeah, I'm not suffering by any means.
Good answer. Very diplomatic as well. You don't want to get offside.
No, it's very true. I've landed in a good part of the world.
Nice one. Is there a book that you have read that has caused you to stop and reconsider a few things in your life?
I think for me, Coherence from Michael Fullan and Joanne Quinn, when I read that a few years ago, and I've read it many times since, and I've got, so many post-it notes coming out of it and highlights throughout and that sort of thing. It just really affirmed, I guess, where my thinking was in terms of education, and also probed and sort of prompted me to think in different ways, or at deeper levels, I guess, in terms of what I believe education should be, or how learning should be enhanced for students, and providing those platforms for teachers and students, or I guess those right drivers of capacity building and collaboration and pedagogy and systemness that brings it all together so that we can sort of remove that ambiguity out of learning. Yeah.
I haven't read that book, but I will be reading it. And Michael Fullan he's just incredible. I'm a huge fan of his work. Michael, if you're listening, love to have a chat to you on the podcast. Shameless plug there. If you could have a dinner party with anybody, who would be there? Your family don't take up seats, so they're automatically invited. But who would you sit down and have a chat with?
This is a tough question, Matthew. When I sit and think of all the various people in the world, past and present, there's so many out there, and I know that table is limited.
Yeah.
I guess first and foremost, I think Jacinta Ardern. I just love her contemporary leadership style, keeping it real, having youngins of her own and that sort of thing, that just, keep that whole leadership thing in perspective through very trying times, but having the trust of the people. And I know that we've had similar leaders sort of in Australia as well. But yeah, I'd love to sit down and sort of have dinner with her. I think for me also Mother Teresa. I just really sort of like resonate with her level of compassion and empathy. And I think that's important, not only from an education learning perspective, but I just think like operating in society, just, understanding each other, putting ourselves in each other's shoes and just learning the backstory, I think, of people. And that helps form relationships moving forward, whether it's like a professional or a personal relationship.
Yeah.
So I think, I could learn a lot from her.
Yeah.
Steve Jobs. I'm massive in innovation, and I know that the term innovation is thrown around in every circle, and it's just, word of today and that sort of thing. But just innovation in terms of doing something new, not necessarily just having the ideas, but actually doing something. And it doesn't have to be something like brand spanking new. It could be just like a new way of doing something that we were existingly doing. So I just loved anything that I could or read or listen to about Steve Jobs. I just thrive on it.
Yeah.
Barack Obama, just in terms of vision and just having sort of like so many things going, I guess, against him in his time of leadership. But also, I think, moving forward, just like having that vision in terms of seeing things that others don't see, or, sticking to what you believe in and your values. For me, sense of humor is very important. You need to be able to laugh at the things that happen day in and day out, not just the good things, but also the bad things. So I think finally it might be Robin Williams. I think there's a lot of power having Robin Williams at the table. And I could have learned a lot from him in terms of, yes, there's that comedy and sense of humor perspective, but also there's that individual struggle, mental health and well-being that a lot of people, are experiencing. And I think it's really important that sort of like we can learn as much as we can about it in terms of moving forward. I think many of us are very good at putting on a front and not showing the cracks that sort of sit behind because of expectation or even worse, like self-expectation. So I think that table for me would be sort of like a well-rounded table where I could get a bit of perspective and a bit of thinking moving forward.
Look, I mean, that sounds like an amazing dinner party. I'm not surprised how often Jacinda Ardern comes up, and you've also suggested some wonderful additions as well. So I'd love an invite as well if you can ever get Jacinda to dinner. That'd be great. You mentioned a little bit about mental health. How do you go with that? I mean, we talked about, and this is a very deep question when we've just got started, but you talked about we're maybe not as good as showing the cracks as we should be. How do you look after yourself, and what has this last sort of 18 months taught you about the importance of self-care? Sorry, let me rephrase that. What has this last 18 months taught you about the importance of self-care?
I've always been sort of like one that I think, looked after myself in terms of self-care, but I think it depends on your role as well and the expectations that are put on you from others.
Yeah.
I'll probably go into the self-expectation bit, my next part of this question, but I think, depending upon role and, if you are there like looking and smiling, and looking like you're coping, and then sort of like more expectation or more responsibilities put on you as an educator in a school, for instance, we're not invincible. And, we can only carry that on for so long. In my experience, like I've had really good leaders and experiences. I always rose to the challenge. I was probably very conscious of showing cracks. And I think back in the day when I was starting to teach, you couldn't show that you didn't know how to do something. Like you had to, really, I guess, convince people that you knew how to teach or what to teach or understanding the curriculum and all those sorts of things. But I think as sort of like time moves on and all the things that have happened in recent years, we've learned, and with the aid of technology as well, that as teachers, we don't know it all.
Yeah.
And we're continually learning and that sort of thing. But I think in terms of self-care, I think it's so important just to take a step back if you feel that, you're not really sort of like above it all. For some of us, including me, that comes a little bit too late. And I guess like the wheels start falling off and, things might not seem like, that things aren't going all too well in the background. But I guess it's when you stop or you change role or have a different perspective on things, that's when sort of you realize, oh, like that was a lot on my shoulders. Yeah. So I guess early identification is really important. Surrounding yourself around good people. There's so many resources and things out there in terms of self-help that I continually access and learn about for my own personal use, but also for those that I come into contact with. One sort of skill I think that, I'm pretty good at is reading people straight away. And I can see sort of things in others that they might not be able to see in themselves, or I can see sort of like things that have happened to me in the past, and I can see, you don't want them heading in that direction. So you might be able to sort of like start a conversation. I think there's just so much power in conversation and storytelling.
Yeah. Look, thank you. That was a very personal question for early on in the interview. I appreciate you. I appreciate your honesty with that. Just wondering, Chad, what was your upbringing like, and what's something that you're grateful for from your parents?
I had I wouldn't say it's individual. I said like movement and change happens for a lot of people, but I was born in Sydney. And when I was 8 years old, we moved up to a big cattle property out of Tamworth, New South Wales.
Cool.
So that was completely different. And I just remember sort of like the different noises hearing for the first time. And I had no experience really of like living or visiting the country.
Yeah.
So I guess like it was like survival mode, moving from all your friends in primary school, because it's the worst possible thing that could ever happen, is leaving your friends behind. But it was really like, it was such a good experience in, growing up on a cattle property. There's so much learning that happens, I guess. So many problems that arise that you need to solve, real world problems. So I guess like being amongst that, I was put in that sort of like, my mindset was sort of changed rather quickly and strengthened in terms of like, trying to solve problems that were occurring and that sort of thing, but also like the level of engagement and motivation you had because you were just like living this great life on a farm. So from that, I guess I'm very grateful to my family for providing me with those experiences and those sorts of things. And I guess you don't really know it until you sort of look back and reflect on, your upbringing and pivotal moments in your life. So like a bit of variety. And then I guess from that, I've just continued to challenge myself and put myself in new environments overseas, working overseas. And then back in Sydney, I was there for 18 years teaching and school leadership. And now I've sort of like come back full circle again and back in the country. So yeah, I think I've experienced the best of both worlds. I know what each have and what the pros and cons are, and just being able to sort of like immerse yourself in that and bring education to sort of like, to a level where it's accessible for all learners and teachers, sort of regardless of where you live.
Do you find transitions particularly easy?
I think at first I do. I guess I just like throw myself into sort of like new transitions and new routines and change. Change doesn't sort of scare me or that sort of thing. But I guess like getting back to sort of like that well-being side, just having, I guess, a gauge on your own self-care and what those changes are actually doing to your body in the sort of like in the background, and just being aware of that and addressing it and just being real about it.
Yeah. In terms of change, is there something that you have recently changed your mind about? It could be personally, it could be professionally. We can come back to that later if you like.
I think for me, probably the biggest one really, and I just always bring myself back to it, is that, teachers don't know everything. Yep. And yep. I know I just quickly mentioned it before, but we don't need to know everything. And it's not about, being Google and sort of telling students what they can go and access somewhere else. And yes, we need those foundational skills, particularly in English and mathematics. And we need to teach those skills around that. But I think it's about providing learning experiences where we're really sort of like providing that explicit teaching and addressing curriculum expectations, but also providing a process where students and learners are being connected to real worlds and being able to find problems, frame those problems, and then go about solving them and teaching the skills associated with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And was there a teacher that had a positive impact in your life? And have you had a chance to thank them for that, if that's the case?
I guess like after I moved up to the farm, went to the local little country primary school, which was very different from my city school experience.
Yeah.
But I remember my year 4 teacher, Miss Farmer, Nell Farmer. So hi to Miss Farmer. I know that she's married and, been married for a while now. Yeah, I think learning in my experience in her classroom, it was just so real world. And I know I keep coming back to you, and that's coming to that point. And I guess that's sort of like, the real essence of who I am as a learner and an educator as well. Just providing those real world experiences, both in the classroom, but also taking us out of the classroom, outside the 4 walls or on excursions and those sorts of things. But not just going for the sake of going, but there was real purpose and merit to everything that we did. And I guess it was explained to us like why we do why we were doing these learning experiences. And I guess also the other part of that, why she still resonates for me as a teacher, just that personable, knew her students, was able to sort of like really check in and really sort of like motivate you as an individual learner. And I know that like as teachers, we all try to be like, I guess, Miss Farmer in a way. But I guess it's just a matter of like really honing in or identifying somebody else on our staff and our schools that might be doing it better and learning from them. And just trying some different strategies with our kids to really sort of like get them up and motivated and connected to their community and their school and each other.
Have you had a chance to thank Mrs. Farmer or Miss Farmer, whatever her name is now?
No, I haven't. So, Miss Farmer from St. Joey's in Werris Creek, if you're listening, thank you very much for everything that you did back in year 4.
Nice. This is a good opportunity to thank. I don't know if she's listening. If she's not, she should be. But I'm sure I'm sure that would mean a lot to her. I remember my teacher, Mrs. Taylor Jones, who I had the privilege of interviewing a couple of seasons ago for the podcast, was that teacher for me. She was my year 3 teacher in this tiny country school in the middle of England called Long Row Primary School. And I have no idea what she taught me for that whole year. But I remember how I felt when I was in her class. I felt like the most important student in the room. And of course, she had 35 other kids, and I'm sure every one of them felt that way. But quite often, it's those, we remember how significant teachers make us feel. And sometimes it's difficult to quantify that. So thanks, Ms. Farmer, wherever you are. Just wondering, Chad, what's your current work focusing on, and why is this important? You talked a little bit about the importance of real world learning, but what does your current work focus on?
So at present, I'm an education consultant, and I've set up my own business, ideatED. So basically, it's about coming up with new ways or different ways in education that matter for students and teachers. And I guess I consider students, teachers, and leaders and parents as well as learners. So in my work, when I sort of talk about learners, I'm not just talking about students. Of course, like we need to hone in, and it's all about enhancing student learning and meeting sort of like curriculum expectations and things. But we're all learning. We're all on the learning journey, and I guess for me, it's about a process that I've sort of like devised and adapted, where we're using the same tool sets, the same language of learning, and the same process of learning for students, for teachers, and for leaders, and for parent education as well. Yeah. So my current work, I'm supporting schools, individual schools that I have partnerships with in New South Wales and interstate, where we're enhancing the learning experience for all learners. and meeting those curriculum expectations, and the teacher standards and everything like that. But using a process like design thinking, I'm a big advocate for design thinking, where it's a rigorous process where we can name the process. We're all talking the same language, and these tools that we use to help us, I guess, unpack our thinking and then externalize our thinking when we're talking about it to others. It really promotes that shared language and that collective accountability across the school, and that motivation that sort of like we're all in this together, and we can learn from each other because we're sort of like trying to do similar things and use these similar tools. So it's not just like students like undertaking something in one grade and then moving up to the next grade and we do something completely different because it's a different teacher. So just really promoting whole school shared language and practice, and then sort of like helping schools with developing whole school learning frameworks.
Yeah.
And also have a passion for the design and build of new classrooms and schools and refurbishments, and how we can use these learning spaces to enhance learning.
There's so much in there and so many follow-up questions I have, so I couldn't possibly do it all justice. But Chad, why is designing learning spaces so important to you, and why does it matter?
Designing learning spaces, and I'm not just talking from an architectural design team point of view, because many schools don't have the budget or the allocation for new or refurbished buildings and those sorts of things. But I guess from an educator's perspective, like a teacher in a classroom, it's about using the space around you. It's like, not necessarily just putting all the laminated glossy posters that I like as a teacher up on the wall, because I think that all my students are going to gain from it. For me, it's about using the learning space and allowing the students to co-construct the learning space around them. So, the work that we do, like you mentioned on Butcher's paper, so like that whole collaborative essence of learning, really enhancing that because we can learn from each other, and then allowing the students to put that up on the wall and access that learning or that thinking at another time, as the learning sort of process emerges throughout the unit of work that's being undertaken. I don't know about you, Matthew, but like some days I kind of remember what I did yesterday or last week. So how we can expect students to retain information and learning that's happened across a unit of work, when schools are such busy places, and they've got home lives that they go to as well, like sporting and family life and that sort of thing. Expecting them to remember everything that we teach them is just, it's not achievable. So trying to retain that learning and having it captured on a wall so that it shows a story of learning across that unit of work. And it doesn't have to necessarily be the Butcher's paper, but it might be an experience where we're on an excursion or we're outside learning about something, and we just take a photo. Like it could be just a random photo. We print that off, we put that up on the wall. As a learner, I can look back and I can look at that photo and remember what I did or how I felt or what I learned about that day. So it paints, I guess, a picture of learning, or captures that story of learning across a unit, so that when we progress through, and it might be around assessment or designing something or solving a problem that we've identified, I can access that learning and sort of like make connections with it. And hopefully it promotes me to think of solutions to a problem or whatever it is the intent of the learning is.
Yeah. So how do we begin to evaluate the effectiveness of these learning spaces?
Yeah, I think one thing that I've done with teachers in schools that I've worked in and supported, I get them to go and do a stock take of their current learning space. Mm-hmm. I remember back at one of the schools that I was most recently working at, I gave them meter rulers and I got them to go and actually measure sort of their learning spaces. But also, and I know like every teacher will say, I don't have enough wall space in my classroom, and that's very valid. But it's just ensuring that basically we do a stock take, that every single thing that's up on that wall has a purpose. And also has a shelf life. It doesn't have to sit up there for a whole school year necessarily. But I sort of go by a bit of a formula when I'm working with teachers. If we can sort of aim for 50% of our learning space wall to be co-constructed developmental learning, so learning that's happening during the day, and the students are co-constructing the wall and we're putting it up there and capturing it. So a whole range of various forms. Could be just like a class copy of, that butcher's paper that we just worked on. It could be the photograph that I mentioned. It might be, like a few different student work samples and that sort of thing that's painting that story of learning. On top of the 50% developmental wall space, I encourage teachers to think 30% celebratory. So that's when we have our artworks and our published pieces and those sorts of things that celebrate learning. And the final 20% is like other pieces, like our birthdays, jobs, or anything else that we need to put up there for WHS and those sorts of things. So in my opinion, that's a really good sort of like balance of a wall space. And we don't want them too busy. As I said, everything needs purpose and it needs to be at sort of like student eye level. So depending on the age of our students, making it sure that the learning's at their eye level and they can access it. They might be able to go and take off something from the wall, go back to their seat, write about it, and then go and put it back on the wall. So it's very interactive.
Yeah, I mean you mentioned a number of things that I use in my class, and one of those is those walls that talk. And so I remember early on in my career, I had this wonderfully laminated and Instagram friendly word wall, but it was too high for the students. They were unable to access it, unable to use it in their writing. And one of the simple things I did was just to put it at student level. It's so practical and so simple. And it's been really wonderful seeing them getting up, getting the words, taking them back to their seats, putting them back on the word wall, co-constructing it together. And I can't emphasize enough how much that changed the sense of ownership within my classrooms, because students got to participate. One of the things I do with my students each term is I get them to design their own learning space. It's a maths lesson. I'll say to them, I've got 30 students, we've got 30 chairs, 8 desks, off you go. And it's a really, really fun experiment to see what they will come up with. And they're often shocked when they come back after recess and the room is arranged in that manner. But really fun why not get them to participate? They spend more time in that classroom in primary schools than they do with their own parents. So it should be co-created, I think.
I agree. And a lot of my work is around student voice and enhancing student voice. So any way that we can incorporate student voice into sort of our learning space and our learning, all for the better. And just like one last thing on the learning environment, like I know that like a lot of bulky furniture and shelving and all those sorts of things go against the walls. And that's basically prime learning wall space. So we need to sort of like think creatively. I know it's not possible in every learning space, but as much as we can, think about how I might be able to arrange that furniture in a different way so that the students can access that wall space that's at their eye level.
Yeah.
The whole big design, I guess, big picture of design from a design team's point of view about a learning space in terms of functionality. Big importance of that in terms of moving forward.
I remember in one of my classrooms, we used to have essentially a ring road around the outside of our classroom. And there was a masking tape line. It was a big square and it was quite a large room, but all the furniture went inside the square, and outside students could walk around. They could upload work samples to Seesaw. They could give me feedback using QR codes. They could access their word wall, and nothing was allowed in that space. And I find that incredibly practical because it was like a little road. Like we had to make sure that students kept to the left if they were going one way, so they wouldn't bump into each other. But I think
that strategy, and obviously you're getting your steps up as well for your well-being.
Yeah, I mean, it's hugely important, and I can't emphasize enough, well, from my experience, just the importance of really thinking about the space that you're in. Like, if it doesn't work, then change it. There's no point using something that is dysfunctional. And I love what you're saying about the limited shelf life of displays and things up on the wall. I constantly change things. Like, for example, we're looking at expositions at the moment, and We went from writing a story about why the pigeon shouldn't drive the bus to why Fiji is the best place to go for a holiday destination. And there's just no point leaving resources about pigeons up on the wall if we're not talking about that anymore. So we're constantly cleaning, constantly sending things home. And like I said, I can't emphasize enough how much I think that has increased the sense of belonging in my class, because students, it's got to be useful. I don't think I've had a desk in my room for 10 years, and that's been great because it means that I can't sit down and hide behind it. And it means I have to have a system for where to put things. Yeah.
Well, I agree. And as good as it is having everything up on the wall as much as possible, everything that we've just been speaking about, it's just as equally valuable and important to allow students to have the time to talk to the wall and that story of journey, or refreshing where we've come from so far in our learning, and allowing every student in that classroom that opportunity to do so. And I think as a school leader, if I'm going into a classroom for whatever reason, just taking that 2 minutes just to ask, can you tell me what you're learning about, and giving them that chance to think about and to process what they've been learning about, and the skills to articulate that in a cohesive way. There's skill building associated in that.
Yeah.
And it all comes back to us as teachers and leaders, the questions that we ask students in terms of their learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Chad, how would you define leadership, and why is it such a passion and a key function of your work?
For me, I've had various leaders, I guess, in my experience. And, I guess we've all had those people, school leaders above us, where, there's things that we definitely take those good practices and we think, I'd love to sort of be like that person, or I'd love to be able to do that. And you take those little bits and pieces and, you form your own leadership style. Equally, there's the other practices that other leaders have done. You think, I'd never do that in a million years. But those experiences are so important.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
No, I was just saying that equally, they're just as important, so that you can sort of develop that individual style of leadership for yourself. In my experience, back in my last school that I was at, we were really sort of honing in on a flat leadership style. So it wasn't just about us telling everybody what to do and demanding everything how we want it and that sort of thing, but it was about making sure that we were compliant first and foremost, that everybody was, we had those safe and supportive learning environments, and the students were safe. But then setting the success criteria of these are the non-negotiables in terms of what learning needs to look like, or effective teaching and practice. Apart from that, you add your own flavor and you enhance that, and allowing teachers the freedom to try new things that based upon research, things that they've seen others do, to really enhance the teacher standards, and bringing about that sort of that everybody has a responsibility to add something to the learning experience, and develop yourself as a teacher more professionally and more effectively, basically.
Yeah. And what do you think then the central role is of school leaders today? Because it seems to be something that has definitely changed since I was at school.
I think for me, in my experience, it's about placing yourself as a leader, being really informed by research and effective practice, so that when people ask questions as to why we're doing things, or is this the right way that we should be approaching something, you've got that research behind you to help articulate, the why it is what we're doing. But equally, it's about building those relationships, being a relational leader first and foremost. If you don't have that, you don't have the respect of those around you that you're trying to lead. Taking the time, because leaders are busy, but just taking that time to do a lap through the school, sort of every morning, checking in with the teachers, with the kids, seeing anything that's emerging, sort of that has emerged since yesterday, or things that could be saved, save the email, but it's a quick chat along the way as you're going through, And I know this isn't achievable every single day, but it's something that I used to try and do in my leadership role. I'd go around, I had like some Post-its in my pocket and a pen. And as I went through saying good morning to everybody, touching base, I'd have like a little list of things that I need to sort of follow up in terms of students or with teachers, or things that, still need following up or doing. By the time I got back to the office, then I could put back onto my sort of like to-do board and that sort of thing. And then just making sure that you follow through. So don't say that you're going to do something and not follow through with it, because people see through that straight away.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't think of an easier way to erode trust than not doing what you say you're going to do.
Yeah. And for me, like, it's about just celebrating the work that's being undertaken. We're so good at, as teachers and leaders, that there's such a massive pile ahead of us of things that we need to do, that to-do list never goes away. We never finish it. So we're always like conscious on that to-do list. Like, we need to stop and celebrate what's happened and what we've achieved.
Yeah.
What's that legacy that we're building as a learning community across the school, and taking those, those staff meetings or those staff professional learning meetings that we have once a week, maybe once a term at the end. It's just to stop, lap around the classrooms, looking at our learning walls and our learning environments, celebrating in terms of it might be something as simple as 2 stars and a wish. Everybody gets that quick chance of just sharing something that has worked really, really well, and something that I want to focus on for the next term of learning. Yeah. And then from that, you're just creating this environment of cross-pollination where those teachers will talk to each other without you there. You don't need to be there. In terms of I really like what you said, or I saw what you did and it worked really well. I want to do that in my classroom next term. Can you tell me sort of how you did it?
Yeah. I think that's so important. And once again, there's so many points within that. It's almost a separate podcast episode in itself. It seems to me that self-awareness as a leader is really important. We talked a little bit about the importance of kind of moving slowly and noticing what's going on. How can leaders begin to develop that in their own leadership? And why is that so important?
In my experience, I think this has been developmental for me. And I was always so busy sort of trying to get everything done, and then you just didn't have time to stop. And obviously reflection is so important, and you try to be so reflective in your leadership and that sort of thing. But I think really trusting those that you work with and building the capacity of others and delegating some of the things that you do really, really well, and I guess just unconscious competently, you just don't have to think about really how you do it. It just rolls off and you tick these off. Yeah. If you've got some of those things that are happening in your practice, then maybe it's time that you shared those skills or develop somebody else to be able to sort of do that as well, which gives you time to focus on new things, but also creates those little times where you can just stop, sit down and be reflective, self-aware. Have a look. Don't always assume that everything's working that you're doing, because it's not. Yeah. Checking in with others. And I used to really sort of rely upon the assistant principals or the middle leaders in the school. They're like the thermometers in the school, I guess. They were the ones sort of caught in the middle between, they knew what the vision of the school is and what, where we're heading and the things that we're putting in place, but then also hearing from the teachers what's working and what's not working, and they're experiencing it for themselves. So I used to really trust sort of those people and have really good relationships with them, and sort of that expectation mutually, tell me what's working and tell me what's not working. And if feedback is such a large part of my work in schools at all levels with students, teachers and leaders, and effective feedback practices, that you just developing that, I guess, that culture in a school, that organisational culture where there's trust, and the feedback isn't about you as a person, it's about the work. Yeah. And we're hard on the content, soft on the people that have been doing that work.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me a little bit about that transition from the classroom to starting your own consultancy business. And are any aspects of teaching that you miss?
Oh, I'm going to jump straight to that last part. I miss the classroom every single day. As a teacher, that's why we go into teaching, is to sort of enhance students' well-being and also their learning. So my work, and because I'm particular about who I work with in terms of partnerships with schools, we make sure the modes of learning and support within that school are right down to a classroom level. So I'm making sure that I'm in classrooms modeling different tools and things with students for the teachers. And so it works two ways. Obviously, like, that's a really good mode in terms of like the gradual release of responsibility model. So like I do, we do, you do. But also it's a good test for me in terms of the work and the tools that I'm modeling for those teachers, whether they're working and still working, because just because they might have worked doesn't mean they're always going to work. But every time I'm in a classroom, it just sparks a new idea in terms of a different way of doing that tool, or a new tool that I think, okay, there needs to, like, there's a void there, and there needs to be sort of some work put into that.
So when someone asks, what do? Do you still say you're a teacher? Because I know so much of my identity and who I am and what I do is wrapped up in that. Is that something that you still say?
Still something I say. So if I'm
which is true,
meeting new people, I always like say, particularly like, if they're sort of like not, I guess, in the education realm and that sort of thing, straight away, teacher, number one.
Yeah.
And then they might ask, oh, what class do you teach? And then I'll be able to elaborate in terms of like what I actually do now. But yeah, celebrating the teacher in me for sure.
So Chad, I'm really interested in that transition from the classroom to your current work. What was that like? Was it something that you had planned for a while? Did you start to get a niggling about wanting to have a much more broader impact? What was that process like?
For me, I've always, as a student, when I was a student at school, and then moving into teaching and then into leadership, I've always had people see things and point out to things to me that I didn't see, and then provide opportunities in terms of leadership opportunities for like various levels. But in terms of like migrating from a school leader, I was seconded into head office to help oversee leadership development and teacher accreditation and those sorts of things after a big stint in my school. So that was a new opportunity that I jumped at, just something fresh. And then even in my work in doing that, when I was working in head office, I was still sort of like tapping back into schools that I was going out and working with, and like doing side gigs in terms of not paid gigs, but like as part of my paid role, just like helping them if I could see, something or a strategy that they could implement. So that it was just a burning passion in me in terms of like, that's what I saw valuable in terms of learning design and school organization. And then I after a long sort of like working relationship with an education consultant down in Melbourne, Tom Barrett, he saw something in me that I hadn't seen. And he said, I want you to come and work with me and support me in the work that I do. And I'd learned so much from him in terms of like different approaches to learning and education that I value. And then more recently, I've stepped out and created my own business and working with schools based on the evolving work that I started back when I was in a school. There's a tool that we make connections with called hexagonal thinking. So basically, it's about using hexagons to sort of put different points of learning and helping students make connections across their learning. When I was at my previous school, I used, and it was when the new syllabus documents and new curriculum were coming out, there was just so much happening in a school where, it was just so much moss and like there was just no time and all those sorts of things. So I just come up with the idea of maybe we could put the syllabus outcomes onto hexagons, and then we could start making connections across the curriculum. And I guess for me, that was a pivotal point where I thought, this actually works, and it's something that's never been done before anywhere. And so we trialed it in our school. It was our little secret that we were sort of like, we're trialing for a couple of years, and we were developing transdisciplinary learning units of work that was, using different connections across the curriculum that were not forced, that were just like naturally linked. and then developing units of work that were so connected to the real world, and using that design thinking process to drive that learning as a process. And it just worked. So now in my work now, it's about supporting other schools on that process. And we're having like huge success in the classrooms with students being able to see the big picture of learning, be connected, be motivated with that learning, but also talk about their story of learning, and the impact that it's making.
Yeah. Was that what was that day like when you handed in your notice?
It was tough, actually. It was something that, like, I'm good at coming up with ideas, but like in terms of when it comes to formality, I guess, and I guess also when you've worked in a system and in schools where, it's salary based and that sort of thing, you just know that it works. It's a big thing just to sort of like press that button and just know that everything's about to change. And I was very supported from my system. Obviously, like, they didn't want me to sort of like leave at that particular point in time, and said, maybe take some leave and that sort of thing. But like, I just knew for me, I couldn't have a leg in either camp. I just needed to sort of like finish something and then start something new. And that's the joy of teaching. Like, we all think that there's only one road ahead in terms of what might be just like, I just want to be a classroom teacher all my life, and that's fine. It's like, there's, so many good teachers out there that's their thing. The minute that we sort of start going up the leadership ladder, that's less time in the classroom. That's being spent there with the students, but equally as important that we need that as well. So I guess there's those existing parts of education that we think that, that's the only track, but there are so many different things out there that we can do in education. And if it doesn't work, then we can go back to teaching, because that's what we train to do. But I think it's always about backing yourself, and trying to see in yourself what other people see in you, and just taking a step to sort of like try something.
I'm just interested as well, Chad, what you think the current COVID-19 pandemic has taught us about the roles of schools, and what questions you think it's caused us to ask or ask again.
I think, and I've always been in sort of like particular mindset that in every problem there's an opportunity. But I guess, like, being an optimist and that sort of thing, like, there's always opportunity there to try and fix a problem, or it might be just like change or develop something new from that. And so I can see in, not only the schools that I support and work with, but, I see it right across schools that I can, and high quality educational leaders I see across many platforms, sharing the work or things that have evolved out of COVID, when they were the most trying and testing times I think schools have ever seen, and still continue to see currently. So for me, I think it's about, we need to continue solving these problems, and just because they might be too hard and we don't know the answers, in terms of how do we move forward and create new platforms for learning, doesn't mean that we shouldn't attempt. We should like really knuckle down, and I think surround ourselves with other like-minded people, or people that can offer a different perspective, and continue moving forward, because the world is moving forward and we need to keep up with it.
And are you confident that we will be able to do that, or do you think we'll spring back into comfortable and old habits?
I guess I see pockets of both in different places. I just think we all want to. It's just we might not have all those answers. I'm optimistic that we can. You look at how education has evolved, like, it'll continue to evolve. I guess it's just like not just changing things for the sake of change. There needs to be a reason for change. There needs to be impact made because of that change, and it also needs to enhance learning. And I think we're really honing on exactly what it is that might need changing, or a different approach. Then we can sort of like nut through that and trial and error different things. And if it doesn't work, then we try something else. But in saying that, not throwing out all the good things that we know. There are so many effective approaches and things that have been developed and research based that we still need to hold on to. It's just a matter of like just changing some of the practices that might be happening.
Yeah, I recently did an interview with Professor Vivian Robinson. She talked about that, the importance of differentiating between change and improvement. And I think we love changing things because it feels good. It feels productive, but not all change necessarily leads to improvement. And I had never considered that distinction from that point of view. So I think that's kind of along the line of what you're saying.
Yeah, I think it just needs to be so informed, data informed, research informed, a bit of innovative brain power involved, bringing those sort of like, those people around a table, like a dinner table together that have something different to offer, to create a new approach or a new way of doing things.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it needs to be sustainable. It's not about you driving this new approach if you're a school leader. And if you walk out the door, it just falls in a heap. So I'm really conscious of the work that I've done in schools and the work I support schools with now, that we make sure that it's sustainable and that there's that shared language and collective accountability across a school, so that whoever leaves, there are people there that will just keep rolling with it and keep evolving it and making it better.
Yeah, absolutely. And fast forward 20, 30 years, what do you want your legacy to be, both personally and also in this education space? What does success look like for you?
Success for me, this is a very hard question, Matthew.
Very hard. I'm sorry, it's the second last one. We'll get there.
Success for me, I think, I guess one of my skill sets is being a bit of a synthesizer and being able to see different elements or parts and see those connections and pull them together to make something new. And basically, like, the work that I've developed is an output of that. And so I guess it's a matter of like me continue to do that and support schools and education systems to sort of like embed or trial these things, so that learning is real and that these strategies and tools got to be realistic and they've got to be sort of like down to earth and relatable for teachers in the classroom and, time managed and that sort of thing. So I guess for me, it's about not necessarily worrying about the heavy stuff, just making sure that, everything's compliant and you're making sure you're ticking off the boxes, but having fun with learning and making it real world and enjoyable, just like Miss Farmer did for me in year 4. And just being somebody who had a go and had something to offer and made a difference for school communities.
Chad, if you were to give a piece of advice for a group of teachers that were about to step into the classroom, what would that be?
For me, it would be about just doing your best, not like knowing that you don't need to know all the answers, but surrounding yourself around good people that are effective in knowledge and practice. And also sort of like keeping, I guess, your job real. And so it's not just necessarily about work, but having that humor there, laughing at the end of the day and those sorts of things to create that work-life balance. I think for me, my advice for new teachers is you learn so much on the job. There's a lot that you learn at tertiary level, but you learn equally, or if not more, in terms of practices and strategies on the ground in a school. So just be kind to yourself, and just keep reading, keep following people on social media or on platforms, or reading books that resonate with you. It'll affirm your thinking of your values of education and give you further thinking of how you could sort of like refine your practice to make it really sort of engaging for not only the students in your classroom, but for you as well. So like if you're not passionate about it, then the kids won't be passionate.
Fantastic. And final question, Chad, where can people find out more about you and follow the amazing work that you're doing?
So my website's ideatED.com.au. So it's ideated.com.au. Or you can also email me at chad@ideated.com.au. And so there's a bit of info up on the website there, but always happy to connect with people and learn about their context and how I can sort of like support in some of the work that I do around curriculum mapping, around learning design, learning spaces, and all those sorts of things, just to make life easier and more coherent for schools.
Fantastic. I'll make sure that I put all this information in the show notes so it's easy for people to access. But Chad, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. It's always a pleasure getting to talk to people such as yourselves and seeing what amazing work people are doing in our education space. So thank you for everything that you're doing. And I really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Matthew. And thanks for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the Art of Teaching podcast today. I hope that you, like me, got some valuable insights out of our discussions. For show notes, please visit theartofteachingpodcast.com. And I've also created a private Facebook group where we can continue the discussion there. The link will be in the show notes. Thanks again for listening and can't wait to see you for next week's episode.